Partway through Grim Fandango, main character Manny will meet this lawyer character and annoy him to no end. His cigarette case contains a key, so Manny steals it, as one does. One of the locked doors in this port town in the land of the dead is for a lighthouse. He goes to open it, but nothing happens. He can't seem to open the cigarette case to get the key inside. Now what? Manny will need to destroy the case somehow. In order to do so, he'll need to talk to the woman at the blimp security checkpoint and show her the case. She'll panic, throw the case in a fortified hold and let it explode, which destroys the case but leaves the key intact. Grim Fandango is a classic point-and-click adventure game from LucasArts. When asking someone what they think of games like this, they're likely to have two responses. They're either going to respond enthusiastically, speaking fondly about how they love to explore the imaginative, off-kilter worlds these games present. That, or they'll respond with a story of how they got stuck on an esoteric puzzle for weeks. Point-and-click adventures have a reputation for being more than a little obtuse. It's not always clear that the best way to open a small metal case is to blow it up. A sarcastic critique of these games is that in order to finish a point-and-click adventure, the player has to guess what's in the developer's head.
And then there was another time where I think we were at lunch with friends from work, and someone said something kind of strange, and another friend just stared at them and said, "What color is the sky in your world?" What color is the sky in your world? And I just kept thinking about that phrase. If you could go into someone's world, like what color is the sky in their world?
This is Tim Schafer, the designer of many LucasArts classics and the face of Double Fine Productions. He got to start working on point-and-click adventure games, aiding in the development of The Secret of Monkey Island 1 and 2 under the direction of Ron Gilbert, co-directing Day of the Tentacle with Dave Grossman, and solo directing Full Throttle and Grim Fandango. Schafer is a one-of-a-kind writer and designer. He's a master world builder, and he's really, really clever. Too clever for his own good almost. When someone's mind is this out there, how is it possible to guess what's in their head? Designing a good puzzle is a lot like telling a good joke. A joke has a setup, a build, and an unexpected punchline. Why did the chicken cross the road? We've established a character and a location. Why? We've given some time to think of possibilities. To get to the other side. An unexpected answer. In this case, we were expecting some greater reason, only to get an obvious literal one. This balance can be tricky though. If instead of "to get to the other side" the punchline was "the Arctic strudel ate my father's eel," that would be unexpected, but it would be too unexpected. It's just nonsense. Likewise, if the punchline was just a fart sound, that might get a laugh, but it would be a cheap laugh. You can only get so many of those before they wear out their welcome. With a puzzle, the same pattern applies. There's a setup that establishes obstacles and a goal, a build that lets the player fiddle around and get stumped, and finally a punchline, an unexpected new way of looking at the puzzle that allows them to solve it. Take this puzzle from Full Throttle. Ben has to get inside the junkyard somehow. There's a chain and a rolling door. Pulling the chain will raise the door, but letting go of the chain will make it slam shut, preventing him from entering. The player clicks around and investigates everything, but there's no way to progress. What the player has to do is find this padlock in another area and use it to lock the rolling door. When Ben pulls the chain, the door doesn't move, but the chain is now taut enough for him to climb over the wall. The setup makes it seem like there has to be some way to hold the chain in place, so Ben can make it through the door. The build is realizing that that's not the case, and the punchline subverts the setup. Locking the obvious path forward is, in fact, the path forward. This puzzle is the purest form of a point-and-click adventure puzzle. Even if the player has never seen a rolling door before, it gives the player all the information they need to solve it. But oftentimes, puzzles can require real-world knowledge in order to progress. In the zany time travel adventure Day of the Tentacle, the player has to convince George Washington to chop down a tree, although he only chops down cherry trees. To pass, the player has to paint the fruit on a nearby tree red. The game doesn't say that cherries are red, they just have to know that already. It's a common piece of knowledge, but it is required. In Full Throttle, the player is tasked with filling a gas canister. To pass, the player has to siphon gas out of a nearby car. The game doesn't tell the player how to do this, it's assuming that they've at least seen this in a movie or something. These sorts of puzzles make the player think outside of the bounds of the game itself. If we can convince George Washington that kumquats are cherries, who else can we prank? If we can steal gas from the cops, what other mischief can we get up to? The risk, though, is that requiring the player to know certain things beforehand might prevent the player from getting the puzzle in the same way someone might not get a joke. If someone had never seen someone siphon gas before, this puzzle would have a much higher barrier to entry. There's an infamous puzzle in Monkey Island 2 in which the player has to find a tool to open a valve. The solution, you ready for this? The solution is to find this monkey playing a piano, put a banana on the metronome to hypnotize the monkey, grab him, then use him to open the valve. You use a monkey wrench. That's hilarious. But you can see why this has issues, right? The term monkey wrench doesn't translate to other languages. It doesn't even travel between different variations of English. These 3 isolated examples show how there are levels to how much one can expect a player to know up front. Where does one draw the line between cherries are red and literal monkey wrench? In these sorts of point-and-click adventures, a good amount of the charm comes from figuring out the rules of the worlds in which they take place. Really, once a player can vibe with the game's logic, things that would seem impossible start to make a little more sense. But even though Monkey Island has pirates and Day of the Tentacle has time travel and Full Throttle has flying cars, they are all somewhat grounded in a reality that resembles our own. What if a point-and-click adventure ignored our world entirely? Grim Fandango is an ambitious adventure game unlike any other. Let me see if I can summarize what it's about. Manny Calavera works for a travel agency in the land of the dead where he reaps clients, the recently deceased, and tries to upsell them on packages to the land of eternal rest. But of course, things aren't what they seem. When a supposedly perfect client doesn't qualify for anything, Manny tries to uncover the conspiracy. It's a wild tale of crime and corruption that pulls from Aztec folklore, retrofuturism, and 1940s noir films. And, of course, there's a hot rod. So yeah, Grim Fandango is unlike anything else. It's a mishmash of styles that come together to present a fully realized world. It's a truly special game, one that was destined to become a cult classic. The first major hurdle is to get a work order signed from his boss to modify a car. The initial thought would be to take it upstairs and ask his assistant, but the boss is busy. So what now? Well, after exploring some more, the player can find this rope made of neckties in the back alley. Climb it, and Manny will be outside the window of his boss's empty office. Now, I would think that Manny would look for something his boss has signed. He could compare it and forge his signature. But this isn't about what I would do, this is about what Manny would do. Interacting with the computer will reveal that his assistant has been reacting to a generic out-of-office message. Manny can change that message to a number of things, including sign it yourself. This is funny and a great introduction to Grim Fandango's humor. The game will be filled with off-kilter moments like this that subvert expectations at every turn. Like the climbing puzzle in Full Throttle, Grim Fandango has given the player all the information they need to progress. As long as they can figure out that Manny can climb up a rope of ties and that this circular thing is a computer, they should be able to make it through. The second major obstacle, though, is where things start to get a little dicey. Okay, so Manny is wondering why his coworker is getting all the good clients and he's not. So he's left to his own devices to try and find a way to get ahead. The game gives the player some new information as this puzzle begins. It introduces this packing material that's probably going to come in handy later. This repairman complains about people throwing bottles down a pneumatic tube machine, and the rival coworker's office is now open to explore. There are 2 stages to this puzzle. First, the player has to figure out how exactly all of these elements are connected. It turns out that the tube in Manny's office is green, and the tube in his rival's office is red. This machine on the ground floor sends messages through these specific colored tubes, so Manny will need to find out what's being sent through the red one. While the game does communicate that the machine and the tubes are connected, it isn't especially obvious at first. But once they figure out the mechanics of the office communication system, the player will then have to figure out what to do with it. It might not be apparent at this point in the game, but Manny is a troublemaker. He is worried about Manny and Manny alone, so he would have no problem breaking something, right? What the player has to do is talk to this clown making balloon animals and request a dead worm, also known as an uninflated balloon. They then have to fill that balloon with packing material, take it upstairs, and shove it down the tube in Manny's office to damage the machine, but it doesn't work. Remember the scene that introduced the packing material? Manny used both hoses. So Manny actually has to get 2 dead worm balloons, fill them up with the 2 different packing materials, shove them both down the tube to break the machine. But then the player has to deadbolt the open door so it doesn't latch when the repairman leaves. Then they have to block the tube to see what the messages in the capsules say, so they have to find a deck of cards in Manny's office to block the tube, but the cards block the tubes too much, so they then have to figure out that they can interact with this hole punch upstairs, punch a card, and then use that to block the tube for long enough to read the message in the capsule. Did you get all that? Grim Fandango is widely celebrated for its stellar writing and world building, but it's just as equally derided for how convoluted many of its puzzles are. This game is notoriously difficult. In order to solve this puzzle, and remember this is the second puzzle, the player has to understand how this retro-futuristic communication system works, know the intricacies of this fictional packing material, and know how real-world pressurized tubes work. That's a lot. We've gone from cherries are red and use suction to move liquids to all of this. In Day of the Tentacle, by comparison, there are several times when similar objects appear in different time periods. In the past, the player can meet Betsy Ross as she's designing the American flag. In the future, that very flag flies above the house. It doesn't take too much of a mental leap to figure out that changing one flag will affect the other. This puzzle has a clear setup and build. But then you get to Grim Fandango, and the setups can be somewhat murky. While exploring, Manny can find both the door to a high rollers lounge at a racetrack and a VIP card that will let him in. These things are connected, but what the player has to do is show the VIP card to Glottis the mechanic, who will run off into the lounge, which is where he needs to be in order to solve a later puzzle. There's little to indicate that Glottis wants to go to the high roller lounge. Apparently he has a bad history with gambling. While I, the player, personally wouldn't enable a friend with a gambling problem, Manny, the character, has no issue with it. It's a solution that makes sense only to Manny. That's the trouble with setting a puzzle game in a world that operates on its own logic. On the one hand, discovering how the world and its characters work is a huge part of the charm, especially in a world as imaginative as this. But on the other, the puzzles run the risk of being borderline nonsensical to anyone not intimately familiar with the world's logic. I think this is where a good portion of Grim Fandango's disconnect comes from. Manny has been in the land of the dead for quite a while. He's stuck there, familiar with its customs and quirks. He knows a good portion of the characters before the story begins. It makes sense on a narrative level for Manny to know that his boss uses an auto-response system, or at least know that's a possibility. He knows about the messaging system and the packing material. He knows about Glottis's gambling problem. He knows the rules he's breaking. Yet the audience doesn't know this. They're working with less information than the character they're controlling. They have to guess what's in his head. Luckily, there's a game that circumvents this problem by baking this idea into its premise. Psychonauts was the first game made by Double Fine Productions, and the first Tim Schafer-led project that wasn't a point-and-click adventure. It's a 3D platformer. A bonkers 3D platformer. The game follows a kid named Raz, who runs away from his family's circus to enroll in a summer camp for psychic youth. There, Raz can enter the minds of various people to see how they perceive the world. But something about this camp is off. Something sinister lurks just beneath the surface. It's a genius premise for a number of reasons. It gives the developers free rein to do whatever they want. The levels don't have to be congruent with one another. Throughout his adventure, Raz learns about the minds of those he explores, while learning to face his own fears and anxieties. Broadly, Psychonauts is a game about perspective, and how perspective can be subjective. There are 9 minds in Psychonauts, and each one is completely different from the one that came before it. Aesthetically, they pull from anything from gritty battlefields to 70s pastiche to classic kaiju films. Mechanically, the levels vary as well. Some are platforming jungle gyms, some are combat-heavy onslaughts, and others are more puzzle-oriented. The way each mind looks and plays will tell us something about the character it belongs to. The second brain in the game belongs to Sasha 9, one of the adults running the camp. He speaks in a monotone voice, takes things literally, and puts his research before everything else. When Raz enters his mind, it manifests as a cube floating in the middle of a void. It's as calm and clean as Sasha himself. This level revolves around Sasha's emotional repression. Sensors, these little creatures that stamp out thoughts, trickle out of these valves. He has regulated his emotions so much that he has it down, well, to a science. But as Raz fiddles around in Sasha's brain, he opens the valves, allowing for his emotions to run rampant in his once organized mindscape. Raz will run, jump, and blast his way through the level, shutting off the sensor valves in the process. But when the final valve is closed, there's nowhere for that emotional energy to go, so it explodes into a giant sensor monster. Everything in this level is unique to Sasha. Since he comes across as ultra-logical in the physical world, it would make sense that his mental world is all about stamping out stray thoughts and feelings. His is the only brain in the game that has sensor valves. His mind operates on rules that are unique to him. We learn something about who he is, how his mind works, and what he worries about. In order to progress through this level, the player must learn what goes on in Sasha's head. This extends to other brains as well. Mia comes across as a free spirit, so her mind is all about long jumps, floating, and getting jostled around. Traversing Mia's mind means not being fully in control of oneself, an aspect that hints at troubles she has locked away. A mind midway through the game belongs to Boyd, a security guard. He's obsessed with conspiracy theories and is afraid of being watched. His brain twists and turns around a supposedly picturesque neighborhood. It's filled with suspicious characters. To progress, Raz has to acquire certain props to make it appear like he belongs, or turn invisible when needed. Even though Psychonauts is a platformer, one can still feel its point-and-click adventure roots. To complete the game's objectives, the player must bend their own mind to make sense of the mental world they find themselves in. They're not trying to figure out what makes sense for themselves, but for the characters in the story. The puzzles the player has to solve are based on each mind's own bespoke logic. Later on, Raz will enter the mind of Gloria, a former actress. Her mind takes the form of a stage play that shows various points in her life. The burnt-out lead performer, the frazzled stage manager, and the loud critic in the balcony all pull the production in different directions. Changing the lighting will make the same scene from her past play out in a different way. Gloria went to a performing arts school at a young age. The scene where she arrives can either be presented as a happy memory, as the first step leading to her big breakout role, or it can be remembered as her mother abandoning her to focus on her own career and love life. Raz will have the ability to change the set on stage, change the lighting between happy and sad, and make the actors perform certain scenes from Gloria's past. In order to make sense of this puzzle, the player will have to figure out quite a bit. They'll have to understand the backstory of this character they know little about. They'll also have to understand which sets go with which lighting and which script. There are many different combinations, and only one will grant the way forward at a time. The ultimate goal is to get this hot air balloon set piece down from the rafters so Raz can explore up there. If this were literally a theater, the balloon could just be lowered, no problem. But since we're in the mind of a stranger, it's not so simple. In order to pass, we need to understand Gloria on a fundamental level. Mechanically speaking, the mental worlds in Psychonauts and the underworld of Grim Fandango operate in similar ways. The player will see wild things on both journeys and have to figure out how to make sense of them. Yet the difference comes from the characters the player controls. Manny is a well-defined character who is familiar with the world he finds himself in, whereas the player is not. The player and Manny are on opposing sides of the puzzle. There's a sequence in which Manny talks to that security officer. He seems to be preoccupied with their handheld metal detector. Manny wants it, and it's obvious that it's important, but he never tells the audience why he wants it so bad. As a character, Manny knows more than we do. But Raz, even though he has an established personality, is a lot more blank than Manny. He's also a tourist in the mental worlds, having to figure out how they work as the player does. The player and Raz are on the same side of the puzzle. In stunted artist Edgar's mind, Raz hangs up a painting of a guitar and one appears. The subject of a painting materializing hasn't happened in any of the mental worlds before, yet it makes sense because both Raz and the audience are trying to understand how Edgar perceives art. We know just as much as Raz does. It should go without saying that Psychonauts is a much more inviting game, especially on a first playthrough. Even though the worlds operate on subconscious dream logic, Raz and the other characters guide the player from moment to moment. When Raz ventures into the mind of someone with paranoia, he's able to bridge that gap. We see in a rather literal way how his view of the world affects him. We know Boyd and the many other people whose mind Raz explores on an intimate level. Meanwhile, a side effect of something like Grim Fandango being so opaque and uncompromising is that the player starts to bend their own minds to be more in line with Manny. You have to think like him to progress. You have to get used to his own brand of selfish logic. That metal detector is actually needed in a puzzle where the end goal is to get Manny aboard a ship that has no room for him. Now, how would I approach this? Well, I would try and stow away, I guess. There's one sailor who's not on board. Maybe I could convince him to quit, or maybe distract him until the ship leaves. But what Manny thinks is the best path forward is to make it seem like he's dead. to knock him out, steal his dog tags, plant him on a corpse, and let the coroner find them with the metal detector. That's not at all what I would have done, but it's what makes sense to Manny. In order to progress, we have to understand him on a fundamental level. I've seen Grim Fandango on a few hardest games of all time lists, alongside with usual suspects like, Dark Souls or Contra or Cuphead. And while, yeah, Grim Fandango is difficult in a very different way, it uses its difficulty to a similar effect. Why doesn't Dark Souls have an easy mode? Well, it's to get the player to master the combat system and play the way the developers want you to. Why doesn't Manny give out hints? It's to make the player think like him. We'll start to understand Manny and the world he inhabits better. Even though Grim Fandango can be uncompromising, it's an effective way to get the players to start thinking and behaving in a way the game wants them to think and behave. As the game progresses, it becomes somewhat easier to guess what Manny will want to do. Even if what the player guesses isn't the right thing, the fact that they're thinking like the character means that it's working. Like other difficult games, its challenge will inevitably filter out players who don't have the patience for it, but those who stay will have their minds altered in a way they will never forget.
But I've always been interested in that idea that there's stuff in our minds that we don't know about, like in our unconscious minds, and that if we could just get in there and dig around, we could uncover secrets that are in our own brain.
When an artist in any medium creates something, the audience learns something about them. Through stories and sounds and images, we can learn about each other and share our perspectives of the world, communicate things that we couldn't communicate otherwise. But with a game, it feels a lot more involved, at least if you ask me. I've never met Tim Schafer. I've played the games he's designed, I've seen those Double Fine documentaries, I've read interviews with him, but I don't actually know him. Yet, I feel like I do know him in a way. I know what aesthetics he likes, I know what he thinks is funny and what he worries about. I kinda know how his brain works. I could say the same thing about Kita Takahashi, or Sam Lake, or Yoko Taro, or Matty Thorson, or Greg Lobanov, or Toby Fox. I don't know these people, yet through exploring the worlds they've created, I feel like we can get a glimpse into their minds. We can see how they would present an idea or how they would approach a challenge. We can know where they draw the line between cherries are red and literal monkey wrench. We can learn how to empathize with each other's troubles and worries. We can learn what others find funny or beautiful. We can see the color of the sky in their world. But what about the games that came after Psychonauts? Over on the IamADot Patreon, you can find an exclusive bonus video about the most metal game of all time, Brutal Legend. Joining the Patreon will get you access to over 25 bonus videos like that one, along with new episodes that are early and ad-free. Thanks for your support.